The release of the M1 really was an event that shook the tech world. The M1 MacBook Air, a laptop with a price tag of $999, nearly beat the previous top model with a 9.9 and 64GB of RAM. This shocking bump in performance, coupled with countless other benefits like the battery suddenly lasting for a whole day of work, or the machine itself not running so hot they had to throttle, convinced me and countless other people to switch over. This new generation of ARM chips came with another big advancement in powerful portable machines. M1 came to iPad. This sudden power increase meant that the iPad, a small, portable device with a touchscreen, had now unlocked almost full desktop-like power, while retaining its original form factor. The limiting factor was now iPadOS, and the lack of pro-level apps on the operating system. It's been almost a year since the release of Logic Pro for iPad, but I haven't had the opportunity to try it out, let alone do any real work with it. Until now, since I recently purchased an iPad for school, and I use it to take notes, but since I have this passion for audiovisual projects and just music in general, I took that as an excuse and bought the more expensive M series model. This is the iPad Air, because you don't really need the iPad Pro when they basically have the same chip. Since this has Apple Silicon, it enables me to use pro-grade apps, or at least Apple says they're pro-grade. But if Apple says it, that has to be true, right? Well, that's exactly what I wanted to find out today. My question isn't, can I retire the Mac? Of course I can't. You know, this is big, bulky, but I love it exactly for that, and I was the one who insisted on getting the bigger one instead of the 14-inch model. My question is, can I do any real, meaningful work on the iPad without having to bring the Mac around with me everywhere, especially to school and those kind of things? As soon as I jumped into the software, I started encountering issues. First off, the way AirPods connect to the DAW is really weird. You have to turn off Bluetooth on all your other devices so it doesn't get picked up by them, and then you have to play media from some other source, and then Logic will pick them up as your default audio device. After I managed to resolve the AirPods connectivity issue, I moved on to producing. Very quickly though, and this is going to be a recurring theme over the video, my frustration with the lack of keyboard shortcuts became apparent. The biggest issue which I ran into, which Logic for desktop also shares, is the need of a separate tool to do simple things. Want to select notes in the piano roll? Well, I'm afraid you can't do that. Why don't you just go ahead and select the trim tool for that, please? Oh, what's that? Oh, now you want to place a note. Well, nah, you can't do that because you have the trim tool selected. How about we go back to the pencil? Oh, you want to edit the velocity? Nah, you need a separate tool for that as well. Go ahead and go into the toolbar and select the other tool. Why do I have a command key here if it's not useful for anything? I don't like this. So frustrating. It's unbelievable. I'm literally never going to use this. So Studio is better. Literally every other piece of software has a better piano roll. I'm also never going to use this. You see, this makes the workflow so slow, and the lack of keybinds for this is just horrendous. The next issue which I ran into was the lack of external plugins. At first I thought I could literally just use my plugins from Mac since they have the same AU extension. Well, turns out even though they have the same file extension and both are called audio units, they're two different things. So I could not just use my macOS plugins. I then searched for decent free plugins, mainly since for EDM production you need a good wavetable synth, but I didn't find any. There was a paid option, Synthmaster, but I wasn't willing to pay for plugins just yet. Considering I did not have external plugins, I started off by making a trap beat, since this kind of music usually does not require you necessarily to have external plugins. I mean, there's some popular ones like Portal, which can help you make creative sounds, and also vintage emulation plugins are really huge, but I wouldn't say they're completely necessary. Very quickly, I ran into frustration and I found myself wanting to quit the idea of music on iPad altogether. After a few days, however, I figured out that maybe I was the problem. You see, I kept treating this like if it was a desktop app, trying to use mouse and keyboard for everything. But this is not a desktop app. It's designed with touch controls in mind, and mouse and keyboard integration feels like an afterthought. This makes the workflow at best sluggish. Desktop Logic Pro is already one of the slower DAWs to work in, so this made iPad Logic Pro a very slow DAW to work in. Frustrating? Yes. But also, I came to the initial assessment that this was the best app of its kind. Best of its kind, and yet so far from perfect. In the following days, I made music pretty much everywhere. In the car, on public transport, while waiting for somebody in the city, even in class. And the experience was not the greatest. I encountered several bugs and half-baked features. So here we go. First of all, audio stretching. The way audio stretching is implemented into the software is just the stupidest thing ever. You can manually stretch clips in the large clip view, but you can't stretch them manually in the playlist. Second, the smart tempo function is not smart at all, and it detects some weird tempos, like for example 185.76, and if you try to edit the detection by entering a precise value, it just straight up makes the program crash, so you cannot correct the 0.76 error, even though it's pretty important. So yeah, smart tempo just does not work. The proper way to stretch a sample is to go into the inspector, input the original BPM, then go into the region menu, go into tempo, and then apply project tempo to region and downbeat. And this way is the only way which I've found to stretch an audio clip precisely without making the program crash, but it's just a bit outrageous that such an essential feature is half-baked. My next complaint has to do with effects and effect chains. This is also a pretty essential feature that isn't well integrated into the software, in my opinion. First of all, when working with complex effects chains, which is what pros do in pro workflows, Logic Pro, the software just straight up crashes when you try adding more than just a few plugins onto the effect chain. So you can't have effect chains that are too complex. I mean, you can, and also the autosave is pretty good, so good job on that. But the software will crash quite often if you have more than just a few effects. Another complaint, which I personally found quite weird, is that you can't delete effects from the large effect view. Like, you just don't have the option to delete them. And to delete an effect, you have to go into the collapsed effect view, and then you can delete the effects. I don't see the reason for that. It's just weird coding, and it didn't get much thought probably. And my last complaint, which is something once again a bit more serious, is that there's absolutely no global mix knob on every effect. Like, I would expect for every effect to have a global mix knob. I don't know if this is a thing in Logic, like the desktop version as well. Like, definitely in FL it's a thing where every effect has a global mix knob regardless of it having its own mix knob or not having it. The biggest pain point, however, for me, and I will not stop mentioning this through the whole video, is the lack of shortcut integration. There are some shortcuts, and yeah, you can use the keyboard. Like, you can open the piano roll with shortcuts, you can open the mixer, you can show faders, you can show the inspector, you can do some basic stuff, okay? But the lack of complete keyboard shortcut integration, like, look, I understand. It's an app that is made for touch controls. So I understand that it's touch controls first and then shortcuts, because the Magic Keyboard is an optional thing and not everybody has a keyboard with the iPad. So yeah, I understand. But look, if you're going to make a pro app, pros use keyboards, okay? So if you're going to make a pro app, please have shortcut support, because to have a pro workflow, you need to have a fast workflow. To have a fast workflow, you need to use shortcuts. And the lack of shortcuts for generic stuff like cutting or selecting tools, please add a shortcut for selecting tools, I beg you. It literally makes the experience so slow and so frustrating, having to select every single tool manually, either by tapping it or going with the trackpad and selecting it. So frustrating, so slow, so distracting. Please add shortcuts. While the previous complaints were things which objectively make this experience worse than the desktop counterparts of this app, I have a few more which someone could call personal preference, because these are not things which are the fault of the developers, and I am talking about external synths and effects. Their availability is limited at best, and you most definitely don't have any of the best pro grade tools which a desktop user is used to, except for FabFilter. So yeah, this makes workflows which are basically muscle memory for desktop users impossible. And since the general availability of plugins is already very low, free plugins are basically non-existent. So if on desktop you can make commercially ready EDM music with just free plugins, that most definitely is not the case on iPad. After some time, I ran into an expected bottleneck, at least for EDM production: the lack of a proper synth. Logic's stock plugins seem alright, and the synths seem equipped with multiple functions. However, when you actually try to use them, you noticed how inadequate they are for EDM production. Maybe they're good, I don't know, I just couldn't figure them out in a reasonable amount of time. Just give me Serum or Vital. I swear I'm going to make Logic for iPad like work, and I'm gonna make hits in it and everything. Just give me Serum or Vital, please, 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 please. Like, the lack of a proper matrix where you could route everything to everything was something which stopped me from trying to design sounds in those synths. Another issue which I ran into was finding the sounds which I wanted to find in Logic or inside of Splice. Logic's browser has a pretty wide array of sounds, and it actually makes you download like around 10 gigabytes of sounds when you buy Logic. So yeah, it's a pretty huge sound library until you start searching for something very specific, and then it becomes apparent that you can't just use the stock samples. And Splice, honestly, what are you doing? The iPad app is the iOS app, but it's just stretched to make it larger. Search functions are pretty mediocre, and I can't find the proper samples which I'm searching for. And also the filters are quite weird. Why can't you just make it like the desktop app? I don't understand. But the biggest issue with the Splice app by far is the way that it downloads samples. So basically, if you want to download a sample, you have to buy it like on the desktop version, and then once you've bought it, you have to download it, and it downloads it into the files folder. But it's creating different folders for every sample pack. So like, you download a sample from one sample pack, and then you download another sample from another sample pack. It's going to create two separate folders and place the singular files in two separate folders, as if you were downloading the whole sample pack. This is the same thing that it does on desktop. The difference is that on desktop you can just take the sounds straight from the Splice app and you drag and drop. That's not a thing on iPad. I don't know why, please make it a thing. Please make the download experience better, and please actually have us being able to drag and drop samples in so you can make Splice a viable option, because I grew so annoyed of having to search for the specific sample pack name every time I wanted to use a sample, especially if you want to use it again, because once you buy it, you kind of can go into Splice and look at the sample pack name. But like once you've already bought it and you're like, oh yeah, I want to use that riser which I bought like a few days ago, and then you try searching for it, obviously you're not going to be remembering the sample pack name, so you're just gonna go and look in random folders. And yeah, I grew so annoyed of doing this that I no longer wanted to use Splice as my main sample selection tool. So I resorted to using files and external sample packs like on desktop. That was until I checked my iPad storage and found out that it's 64 gigabytes. And look, buying a 64 gigabyte version of anything in 2024 is basically condemning yourself. I know, I've bought this knowing that it has 64 gigs of RAM, but like, I'm a student. Can you blame me? Like, I don't earn money, especially not through the academic year. And if you try going onto Apple's website and see how much a storage upgrade costs, yeah, I'm not paying that money, okay? However, for an external SSD, yeah, I might have just spent like the last 15 seconds talking about how I'm poor and I don't have money. But like, can you really blame me? I need it for this silly little video because like the files from the camera are outrageously large, and also I'm financially irresponsible, so yeah, this is the result of that. But it's honestly so convenient, and now when I want to find a sound, I can just browse through my 150 gigabyte library and find what I want to find. Still not perfect because I can't design sounds. I still lack a synth, but at least I have samples. The one redeeming tool, at least for EDM production, is Roundtrip. Roundtrip allows you to take your iPad projects and use them on Mac, and I think vice versa, but I don't think anybody's going to be using that, especially because the discrepancies between plugin availability are so huge that starting a project on Mac and going to iPad would just result with everything being incompatible. I've tried the feature and honestly it works pretty well, and it allows this DAW experience to pass just from a cool gimmick onto a full-on, very usable tool. There's some minor bugs with it. For example, the techno project became almost 3 gigabytes from 70 megabytes, and everything I added was one Serum Reese-based preset, so don't know what that's about, but yeah, it just works decently well overall. I've been testing Logic Pro on and off for I think a month, and I can say that it's definitely very, very far from being perfect. The experience feels very slow and frustrating, not to mention the half-baked features and the bugs. That being said, the availability of the Roundtrip feature makes it a valid tool even for professionals. The M-series chip provides excellent power for small to mid-sized projects. And in fact, I never got the system overload message in my whole month of testing. My main complaints are the lack of keyboard shortcuts and the lack of third-party plugins, which are the two main things which prevent this from being a full-fledged desktop DAW replacement. However, for $5 a month, it's definitely an excellent piece of software for writing down ideas and finishing them later in the studio. That's exactly what I'm going to be keeping it for. Writing down ideas and or making hip-hop loops.